Welcome to Unspoken Affairs. It was still warm when I realized what I had done. My lips tingled, my heart pounded, and for a moment the world around me seemed to blur into silence. I told myself I would never let it go that far, that I was stronger, wiser, in control. But the truth is, control had slipped through my fingers long before that night. This is my story, messy, complicated, shameful, and yet it's a story that changed me forever. My name is Linda, and for the past 15 years, I've been a wife, a mother, a woman who thought she had her life figured out. On the outside, everything looked perfect. A neat little house with flower boxes under the windows. A husband who worked hard, a son who had just gone off to college. People would see me in the grocery store and smile, probably thinking I had the picture-perfect suburban life. But what they didn't see was the emptiness that had begun creeping into the quiet spaces of my days. It started when my son moved away. The silence in the house was louder than anything I'd ever known. I'd catch myself setting an extra plate on the dinner table out of habit, only to put it back in the cabinet with a lump in my throat. My husband, Mark, didn't notice much. He was busy, always tired, always distracted with work. He'd kiss me on the cheek before heading off in the morning, and that was about as close as we came to intimacy anymore. Nights were the hardest lying next to someone who once made my heart race. And realizing I felt more like a roommate than a wife. It was during that time of loneliness that Steve came into our lives. He was 23, just a few years older than my son, looking for a place to stay while he finished up his graduate program. Friend of Mark's mentioned we had a spare room now that our son had moved out. And before I knew it, Steve was standing at my front door with 2 suitcases. And a shy smile. He was polite, respectful, the kind of young man you wouldn't mind having around the house. At first, he mostly kept to himself, studying late into the night, occasionally joining us for dinner when Mark was home. But when Mark worked late, Steve and I would sometimes end up talking in the kitchen, sipping tea while the clock ticked. Past midnight, it was innocent at first, just small talk, filling the silence that had weighed so heavily on me. But then came the laughter, the kind that feels like sunlight warming places in you that you thought had gone cold forever. I remember one evening in particular. I'd been folding laundry in the living room, a mundane task I usually dreaded. Steve walked in, hair damp from the shower, wearing a simple t-shirt and sweatpants. He offered to help me fold, and I laughed, teasing him that men never knew how to fold fitted sheets. He grinned and insisted he could do it, and somehow that ordinary moment became extraordinary. Our hands brushed over the fabric and something shifted in the air. Neither of us said anything, but the silence was thick, charged. Like static before a storm. From that night on, I found myself noticing things I shouldn't. The way his eyes lingered when I spoke. The way he leaned just a little closer than necessary when we sat at the kitchen table. I tried to convince myself it was harmless, that I was imagining it, that he was just being kind. But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining anything. I was craving it, craving attention, connection. The kind of energy I hadn't felt in years. I told myself boundaries mattered, that nothing would ever happen. But temptation has a way of sneaking past walls you thought were strong. One late evening, after Mark had gone out of town for work, Steve and I ended up sitting in the living room, talking again. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. He asked me about my life, about my marriage, about whether I was happy. I hesitated, then confessed more than I should have how lonely. I felt how invisible I had become in my own home. He listened intently, his eyes soft, his voice gentle when he said, "You deserve more than that." Those words pierced me. They weren't just sympathy. They were an invitation, an acknowledgement of something neither of us had dared to speak aloud. My heart was racing so fast I could barely breathe. And when he reached out and brushed a strand of hair behind my ear, I didn't stop him. I should have, but I didn't. The first time our lips touched, it was like crossing an invisible line I'd been tiptoeing around for weeks. A line I told myself I would never cross. His mouth was warm, tentative at first, as though waiting for me to pull away. But I didn't. I let it happen. I leaned into it. And that's when everything changed. The guilt hit me almost instantly. My husband's face flashed in my mind. The years of marriage, the vows I had once spoken with trembling hands and hopeful eyes. But the guilt didn't stop me, not that night. Not in the nights that followed. Because alongside the guilt was something else. A rush of adrenaline. A feeling of being alive again. Of being wanted, desired, seen. It was intoxicating, and I was drowning in it. Days turned into weeks, and what started as one stolen kiss spiraled into something deeper, more dangerous. We became experts at secrecy, careful glances, coded words, timing everything perfectly so Mark never suspected a thing. Every touch was both thrilling and terrifying, every whispered conversation a mixture of joy and dread. I knew it couldn't last, that secrets like ours always find a way of clawing their way into the light. But I couldn't bring myself to stop. There were moments of tenderness that haunt me even now. Like the morning I found a note slipped under my door, written in Steve's messy handwriting, "You make me feel at home." Or the way he'd look at me sometimes as if I were the only person in the world. Those little things carved themselves into my heart, making it harder and harder to let go. But with every high came the crushing weight of what I was risking. Mark may not have been perfect, but he didn't deserve betrayal. My son didn't deserve a mother who was lying, hiding, pretending. I was torn between two versions of myself, the woman who wanted to honor her family, and the woman who craved the fire she thought she had lost forever. The breaking point came one rainy afternoon. Mark had called to say he'd be home earlier than expected. Panic surged through me, and in that moment I realized how close I was to losing everything. The lies, the sneaking around, the constant fear, it was all catching up to me. I saw the future laid out before me, my marriage destroyed, my son ashamed, my reputation in shambles. And I knew I had to choose. Ending things with Steve was one of the hardest things I've ever done. He didn't make it easy. He begged me to reconsider, told me he cared about me, that we could find a way. But I knew the truth: our relationship was built on stolen moments and broken promises. It couldn't survive in the daylight. I told him it had to end, and though my heart ached, I walked away. Life went back to normal, or at least it looked that way from the outside. Mark never found out, and Steve eventually moved out, taking with him the pieces of me I had given away so recklessly. But inside, I was changed. I carry the weight of my choices, the knowledge of what I'm capable of when loneliness meets temptation. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if anyone truly knows the person I've become. So why am I telling you this? Because secrets have a way of rotting you from the inside. I needed to let it out, to confess in some way, even if anonymously. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't even know if I deserve it. But I do know this: temptation doesn't knock on your door with a warning. It creeps in quietly, disguised as kindness, laughter, companionship. And before you know it, you're standing at the edge of a cliff, one decision away from losing everything. This was my decision, my mistake, my story, and now it's yours to hear.